The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as the first hints of what would become an extraordinary day began to unfold. It was Tuesday, July 19, 2016, and London was buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes when world leaders are about to meet. The city had been preparing for weeks for this moment, when President Barack Obama would make his final official visit to the United Kingdom as the leader of the free world. Inside the palace walls, everything moved with the precision of a Swiss watch. Palace staff had been up since before dawn, polishing every surface until it gleamed, arranging flowers in perfect symmetry, and ensuring that every detail of the historic building reflected the grandeur expected for such an important occasion. The Queen's household had rehearsed the day's events countless times, from the exact positioning of furniture in the staterooms to the timing of each ceremonial element that would mark the president's arrival. Outside on the streets of London, thousands of people had gathered along the route that Obama's motorcade would take from his hotel to the palace. Some had been waiting since the early hours of the morning, wrapped in blankets and clutching thermoses of hot tea, determined to catch even the briefest glimpse of the American president who had captured imaginations around the world. Street vendors moved through the crowd selling small American and British flags, while police officers maintained a friendly but watchful presence, ensuring that the enthusiasm of the crowd remained peaceful and organized. The media presence was overwhelming. News crews from every major network had positioned their cameras at strategic points along the route and around the palace grounds. Reporters spoke in hushed, excited tones into their microphones, describing every detail of the preparations to audiences watching from around the globe. Photographers checked and rechecked their equipment, knowing that they might have only seconds to capture the perfect shot of this historic meeting between two of the world's most respected leaders. At Westminster Barracks, just a few miles away from the palace, the soldiers of the Queen's Guard were going through their own careful preparations. These were not ordinary soldiers but members of one of Britain's most elite military units, chosen not just for their military skills but for their ability to represent the very best of British tradition and discipline. Each man had spent months learning the ancient protocols that governed their behavior, understanding that when they put on the famous red tunic and towering bearskin hat, they became living symbols of centuries of British history and pride. Among these guardsmen was James Mitchell, a young man of 23 who had joined the regiment just 8 months earlier. James came from a small town in Yorkshire, where his family had lived for generations. His father had worked in the local steel mill until it closed down, and his mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. For James, joining the Queen's Guard represented not just a career but a chance to bring honor to his family name and serve his country in the most prestigious way possible. The night before Obama's visit, James had called his family as he always did before important ceremonies. His younger sister Emma, who was 19 and studying to become a nurse, had been especially excited about his role in welcoming the American president. She had always looked up to her big brother, and seeing him serve at Buckingham Palace filled her with pride that she shared with everyone she met. Their parents, though they struggled financially, had never missed an opportunity to tell their neighbors about their son who guarded the Queen herself. James had worked incredibly hard to reach this position. The training had been grueling, involving hours of drill practice where recruits learned to stand perfectly still for extended periods, regardless of weather conditions or distractions. They practiced marching in perfect synchronization, their movements so precise that they appeared to move as one organism rather than individual soldiers. The mental discipline required was just as demanding as the physical training, as guards were expected to maintain their composure no matter what happened around them. The bearskin hats that the guards wore were themselves steeped in history, each one crafted from the fur of Canadian black bears and standing over a foot tall. These impressive headpieces had been worn by British soldiers for more than 2 centuries, originally designed to make soldiers appear taller and more intimidating on the battlefield. Now they served as instantly recognizable symbols of British pageantry and tradition, photographed by millions of tourists every year but worn by only a select few who had earned the right through their dedication and service. As James put on his uniform that morning, carefully adjusting each element according to the strict regulations he had memorized, he felt the familiar mixture of pride and responsibility that came with representing his country. The red tunic, with its intricate braiding and polished buttons, transformed him from a young man from Yorkshire into a guardian of royal tradition. The weight of the bearskin hat reminded him of the generations of soldiers who had worn similar uniforms, standing guard through world wars, royal weddings, state funerals, and countless other moments of national significance. The palace itself, we seemed to hum with anticipation as the morning progressed. Staff members moved through the corridors with purposeful efficiency, making final adjustments to arrangements that had already been perfected. The state dining room had been set with the finest china and crystal, while the throne room had been prepared for the formal photographs that would mark this historic meeting. Even the palace gardens had received extra attention, with gardeners ensuring that every flower bed displayed the perfect balance of color and form. Queen Elizabeth II, now in her 90th year, had been receiving world leaders for more than 6 decades, but she still approached each state visit with the same careful attention to detail that had marked her entire reign. Her staff knew that she would personally review every aspect of the day's program, from the menu that would be served at the state banquet to the specific pieces of art that would be displayed in the rooms where she and President Obama would meet. Meanwhile, across London at his hotel, President Obama was going through his own preparations for this significant day. His staff had briefed him extensively on the protocols he would need to follow, the people he would meet, and the symbolic importance of each element of the visit. Obama understood that his every gesture would be analyzed and interpreted by observers around the world, and he was determined to show proper respect for British traditions while representing American values and interests. The president had always been known for his ability to connect with people from all walks of life, from world leaders to ordinary citizens. His staff had seen him countless times break from official protocols when he sensed that a more human touch was needed. Whether it was stopping to talk with children who had gathered to see him or taking extra time to acknowledge the service members who provided security for his travels. As the morning progressed and the time for Obama's departure from his hotel approached, the various elements of this carefully orchestrated day began to come together. The motorcade was assembled and checked multiple times, with each vehicle positioned according to security protocols that had been developed over years of experience. Secret Service agents reviewed their communications systems and confirmed that every aspect of the route had been secured. Back at the palace, Guardsman Mitchell took his position along with his fellow soldiers, each man standing at precise intervals along the route that the president would walk. The weight of his uniform, the responsibility of his position, and the excitement of the moment all combined to create a sense of anticipation that was almost overwhelming. He thought about his family back in Yorkshire, knowing they would be watching on television, and felt proud to be representing not just his regiment but his entire community on this historic day. The stage was set for what everyone expected to be a flawless display of diplomatic ceremony and British pageantry, but none of the participants could have imagined that within hours, a simple human moment would transform this routine state visit into something far more meaningful and lasting. The black armored limousine carrying President Obama moved through the streets of London with the smooth precision of a well-rehearsed dance, flanked by motorcycle escorts and followed by a convoy of support vehicles. The presidential motorcade represented one of the most secure transportation systems in the world. Inside the specially reinforced car, Obama sat quietly reviewing his notes for the meetings ahead, occasionally glancing out the bulletproof windows at the crowds of people who had gathered to witness this historic moment. The journey from the hotel to Buckingham Palace normally took about 15 minutes, but today every second had been carefully calculated to ensure that the president's arrival would coincide perfectly with the Queen's schedule. Traffic had been completely cleared from the route hours earlier, and police officers stood at every intersection, their presence both reassuring and impressive to the thousands of spectators who lined the sidewalks. As the motorcade approached the palace gates, the excitement among the waiting crowds reached fever pitch. People pressed forward against the barriers, holding up phones and cameras to capture whatever glimpse they could of the American president. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving small flags and calling out greetings that would likely go unheard but represented their genuine enthusiasm for this moment of international friendship. The palace gates, those famous black iron barriers that had welcomed and protected British royalty for centuries, swung open with ceremonial grandeur. The guards who operated them had practiced this moment dozens of times, ensuring that every movement would be executed with the precision expected of such an important occasion. As the motorcade passed through, the crowds erupted in cheers and applause, creating a wall of sound that could be heard even inside the heavily insulated presidential limousine. Inside the palace courtyard, the scene was one of controlled magnificence. The ancient stones of the building seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight, while the perfectly manicured lawns and flower beds provided a stunning backdrop for the ceremony about to unfold. Palace staff members, dressed in their finest uniforms, had taken their positions at strategic points throughout the area, ready to assist with every aspect of the president's visit. The Queen's Guard stood at attention in their designated positions, their red uniforms creating brilliant splashes of color against the gray stone walls of the palace. Each soldier represented hours of training and preparation, their posture perfect and their focus absolute. To casual observers, they appeared as motionless as statues, but beneath their impressive exterior, each man was fully alert and ready to respond to any situation that might arise. Guardsman James Mitchell had taken his position along the main walkway that President Obama would use to enter the palace. From where he stood, he would have a clear view of the American leader as he made his way to meet Queen Elizabeth II. James felt the familiar weight of his bearskin hat and the slight pull of his red tunic across his shoulders, reminders of the responsibility he carried as a representative of British military tradition. However, something was different about this day for James as he stood at attention. His mind kept drifting to a phone call he had received just 2 hours earlier. Commanding officer had pulled him aside during the final preparations and informed him that there was an urgent family matter that required his attention. The news had hit him like a physical blow, threatening to shatter the composure he had worked so hard to maintain. His younger sister, Emma, the nursing student who had been so proud of his service with the Queen's Guard, had been involved in a serious car accident while driving to a clinical placement at the local hospital. The details were still unclear, but what James knew was enough to fill him with dread. Emma had been rushed to the emergency room, and the doctors were still assessing the extent of her injuries. His parents were at the hospital trying to get more information, but the uncertainty was eating away at everyone in the family. James had requested permission to leave his post and rush home to Yorkshire, but his commanding officer had explained that this was impossible. The Queen's Guard had commitments that could not be broken, especially on a day as important as this one. Arrangements were being made to get him home as soon as the presidential visit concluded, but for now, he had to fulfill his duty to his regiment and his country. The young guardsman struggled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his professional training. Every instinct told him to abandon his post and race to his sister's bedside, but years of military discipline held him in place. He thought about Emma's bright smile and her dreams of becoming a nurse, her determination to help others and make a difference in the world. The possibility that those dreams might be cut short filled him with a grief that was almost unbearable. As President Obama's limousine pulled to a stop in the palace courtyard, James tried to push these thoughts from his mind and focus on the ceremony unfolding before him. The car door opened, and the president stepped out with the confident bearing that had made him one of the most recognizable leaders in the world. Obama paused for a moment, straightening his suit jacket and taking in the magnificent surroundings of the palace courtyard. The president's arrival had been timed to perfection, and palace officials immediately moved to guide him through the traditional ceremonies that would mark the beginning of his visit. However, even as Obama acknowledged the greetings of various dignitaries and officials, his observant nature was already at work, taking in details that others might miss. Obama had always prided himself on his ability to read people and situations, a skill that had served him well throughout his political career. He noticed the way palace staff carried themselves with quiet pride, the careful attention to detail in every aspect of the ceremony, and the obvious respect that everyone showed for the traditions they were upholding. But he also noticed something else, something that made him pause and look more carefully at the soldiers standing guard. The Queen's Guard were renowned for their ability to remain completely motionless and expressionless, regardless of what was happening around them. They were trained to ignore distractions, weather conditions, and even personal discomfort in order to maintain their professional bearing. This reputation for unshakable composure was part of what made them such effective symbols of British military excellence. Yet, as Obama's experienced eye swept over the line of guardsmen, he detected something that others might have missed. One of the soldiers, a young man standing along the main walkway, seemed to be struggling with something beyond the normal challenges of maintaining his position. There was a slight tremor in his posture, a tension that suggested internal conflict, and if Obama looked closely enough, he could see what appeared to be moisture gathering at the edges of the young man's eyes. The president's security detail was already moving to escort him toward the palace entrance where Queen Elizabeth II would be waiting to greet him. Protocol demanded that he follow the carefully planned schedule that had been designed to make the most efficient use of both leaders' time. Every minute of the visit had been choreographed to ensure that all the necessary ceremonies could be completed while still allowing for the substantive discussions that were the real purpose of the meeting. But something about the young guardsman's obvious distress called to Obama's fundamental sense of human compassion. Throughout his presidency, he had encountered countless situations where the demands of protocol and ceremony had to be balanced against more basic human needs. He had learned to trust his instincts about when it was appropriate to break from established procedures in order to address more pressing concerns. As he walked toward the palace entrance, Obama found himself thinking about the young soldier who was clearly struggling with some personal crisis. The president understood that behind every uniform was a real person with real problems, and he had never been able to simply ignore human suffering when he encountered it. The question was whether this was a moment that called for presidential intervention or whether he should respect the established protocols and allow the ceremony to proceed as planned. The weight of this decision would soon prove to be one of the most significant choices Obama would make during his entire visit to London. The moment of decision arrived faster than anyone could have anticipated. President Obama had taken only a few steps toward the palace entrance when he made a choice that would echo through history and touch hearts around the world. Instead of continuing along the carefully planned route to meet Queen Elizabeth II, he stopped walking and turned his attention fully toward Guardsman James Mitchell. The president's sudden change in direction sent ripples of confusion through the assembled palace staff and security personnel. Protocol officers who had spent weeks planning every detail of this visit watched in bewilderment as Obama deviated from the script they had memorized. Secret Service agents, trained to respond instantly to any unexpected situation, tensed and began speaking quietly into their communication devices, unsure whether this represented a security concern or simply a spontaneous presidential decision. British palace officials exchanged worried glances with their American counterparts, wondering how to respond to this unprecedented situation. The carefully timed schedule that governed every state visit had no provisions for unplanned stops or impromptu interactions with the gods. Everyone present understood that Queen Elizabeth II was waiting inside the palace, prepared to greet President Obama at the exact moment that had been agreed upon weeks in advance. But Obama had made his decision based on something more fundamental than diplomatic protocol. Throughout his presidency, he had consistently demonstrated a belief that human connections mattered more than formal procedures, and this moment was no different. He had seen a young man in distress, and his instincts told him that offering comfort was more important than maintaining a schedule. The president walked directly toward James Mitchell, with the quiet confidence that had characterized his leadership style throughout his time in office. Each step he took created a growing sense of anticipation among the onlookers, who began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Photographers who had been positioned to capture standard ceremonial shots suddenly found themselves documenting an unscripted moment of genuine human interaction. James, still standing rigidly at attention despite his emotional turmoil, was unaware of Obama's approach until the president was almost beside him. The young guardsman's training had taught him to focus straight ahead and ignore distractions, but the growing murmur of surprise from the assembled crowd gradually penetrated his concentration. When he realized that the President of the United States was walking directly toward him, James felt his heart rate increase dramatically. The strict rules governing the behavior of the Queen's Guard were clear and absolute. Soldiers on duty were not permitted to speak, move, or acknowledge anyone who approached them, regardless of who that person might be. They were expected to remain as motionless as statues, their eyes fixed straight ahead, their faces expressionless. Breaking these rules could result in serious disciplinary action and potentially the end of a military career. Yet as Obama drew closer, James found himself caught between his professional obligations and his personal crisis. The weight of his sister's accident pressed down on him like a physical burden, making it almost impossible to maintain the composure that his position demanded. Tears that he had been struggling to suppress throughout the morning began to flow more freely, creating visible tracks down his cheeks. Despite his efforts to remain stoic, Obama's approach had not gone unnoticed by the media representatives who were covering the visit. Television cameras that had been focused on the palace entrance quickly swiveled to follow the president's unexpected movement. Photographers with telephoto lenses began capturing every detail of this unfolding drama, sensing that they were documenting something far more significant than a routine diplomatic ceremony. The president stopped directly in front of James Mitchell, close enough that the young soldier could hear him breathing. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Obama simply stood there, taking in the full extent of the guardsman's distress. The president's own father had died when Obama was young, and he understood the particular pain of worrying about family members who were suffering or in danger. When Obama finally spoke, his voice was soft enough that only James could hear the words clearly. The president had deliberately chosen to keep his comments private, understanding that the young soldier was already dealing with enough pressure without having his personal crisis become a public spectacle. The words Obama chose were simple, but carefully considered, designed to offer comfort without requiring any response that might compromise James's professional position. "Son, I can see you're carrying something heavy today," Obama said, his voice filled with genuine compassion. "Whatever it is, know that your service here matters, and so do you. Sometimes life puts us in impossible situations where we have to choose between our duty and our heart, but you're handling this with more strength than you realize." The impact of these words on James was immediate and profound. Throughout the morning, he had felt completely alone with his worry and grief, isolated by the demands of his position from anyone who might offer support or understanding. To have the President of the United States acknowledge his struggle and validate both his service and his humanity was overwhelming in the best possible way. Obama's next gesture surprised everyone even more than his words had. The president reached out and placed his hand gently on James's shoulder, a simple human touch that bridged the enormous gap between their respective positions in the world. This physical contact lasted for only a few seconds, but its symbolic power was immense. Here was the leader of the most powerful nation on earth offering comfort to a young soldier who was struggling with personal tragedy. The assembled crowd fell completely silent as they witnessed this extraordinary moment. Hardened journalists found themselves unexpectedly moved by the simple humanity of the scene unfolding before them. Palace staff members who had participated in hundreds of formal ceremonies suddenly realized they were seeing something genuinely special, a moment that transcended the usual boundaries of diplomatic protocol. Secret Service agents who had initially been concerned about the president's deviation from the planned schedule began to relax as they recognized that this was simply Obama being himself. They had seen him make similar spontaneous gestures countless times throughout his presidency, always driven by his instinct to connect with people who needed support or encouragement. James felt the weight of Obama's hand on his shoulder and experienced a surge of strength that he had not expected. The president's words and touch did not make his sister's accident any less serious, but they reminded him that he was not alone in facing this crisis. Someone had seen his pain and acknowledged it, offering comfort without judgment or expectation. The moments stretched on as Obama continued to stand beside the young guardsman, his presence serving as a silent source of support. The president understood that sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is simply to be present with someone who is suffering, to acknowledge their humanity and validate their experience. Finally, Obama stepped back slightly but maintained eye contact with James for another few seconds. The president's expression conveyed a mixture of respect for the young soldier's service and understanding of his personal struggle. Without saying another word, Obama nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to communicate both encouragement and solidarity. As the president finally turned to continue toward his meeting with Queen Elizabeth II, the impact of what had just occurred began to sink in for everyone who had witnessed it. This had been more than a simple departure from protocol. It had been a demonstration of leadership that prioritized human compassion over ceremonial requirements, showing that even in the most formal settings, there was always room for genuine human connection. The ripple effects of this moment would soon spread far beyond the palace walls, touching lives around the world and creating a lasting symbol of what true leadership could look like, when it was guided by empathy and understanding. As President Obama walked away from Guardsman James Mitchell and continued toward his meeting with Queen Elizabeth II, the effects of their brief encounter began to ripple outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water. The photographers who had captured the moment were already transmitting their images to news organizations around the world, and within minutes, the photograph of Obama comforting the young British soldier would begin appearing on screens and front pages across the globe. Inside the palace, Queen Elizabeth II was waiting in the grand entrance hall, prepared to greet President Obama with the formal ceremony that had been planned for months. However, word of the president's spontaneous interaction with the guardsman had already reached her through the palace communication system. Rather than being annoyed by the delay in the schedule, the Queen was reportedly impressed by Obama's instinctive understanding of when human compassion should take precedence over diplomatic protocol. When Obama finally arrived for their meeting, the Queen greeted him with particular warmth. Those present later recalled that she made a point of mentioning how much she appreciated leaders who understood the importance of supporting the men and women who served their countries. The Queen herself had spent decades acknowledging the service and sacrifice of military personnel, and she recognized in Obama's gesture the same values of duty and care that she held dear. Meanwhile, back at his post, James Mitchell was experiencing a transformation that he would later describe as life-changing. The brief encounter with President Obama had given him the strength he needed to complete his duties for the remainder of the day. The president's words continued to echo in his mind, particularly the phrase about carrying something heavy and the acknowledgement that his service mattered. For the first time since receiving the news about his sister's accident, James felt capable of maintaining his professional composure while still honoring his personal concerns. The other members of the Queen's Guard had witnessed the entire interaction, and while they maintained their rigid positions and expressionless faces, each of them was deeply moved by what they had seen. These were men who understood the weight of duty and the challenge of maintaining professional standards even when personal crises threatened to overwhelm them. Seeing their colleague receive support and recognition from such an important figure gave all of them a renewed sense of pride in their service. The palace staff who had organized the visit found themselves dealing with an unprecedented situation as news of Obama's gesture spread throughout the building. Phone calls began pouring in from journalists around the world who wanted more information about the encounter. Social media platforms exploded with shares and comments as people responded to the photographs and video footage of the president comforting the young soldier. The story took on a life of its own as it spread across the internet. Within hours, the hashtag Obama Royal Guard was trending on multiple social media platforms, with people sharing their own stories of moments when unexpected kindness had made a difference in their lives. Veterans and active military personnel were particularly vocal in their appreciation for Obama's gesture, noting how rare it was for high-ranking officials to acknowledge the personal struggles that service members often faced. Television news programs around the world led their broadcasts with the story, using the photographs as a symbol of leadership that transcended political boundaries. News anchors spoke about the power of simple human gestures and the importance of leaders who could see beyond their official roles to connect with individuals who needed support. The story resonated particularly strongly in Britain, where the Queen's Guard represented a beloved symbol of national tradition and pride. James Mitchell's family back in Yorkshire was watching the news coverage when they first learned about their son's encounter with President Obama. Despite their worry about Emma's condition in the hospital, they felt an overwhelming surge of pride as they saw James being recognized on the world stage. His parents had always known their son was special, but seeing him receive personal attention from the President of the United States confirmed their belief in his character and dedication. The hospital where Emma was being treated became another the focal point of media attention as reporters learned about the family crisis that had prompted Obama's compassionate response. However, the family was relieved to receive good news about Emma's condition. The doctors reported that while her injuries were serious, they were not life-threatening, and she was expected to make a full recovery with proper treatment and rehabilitation. When James was finally able to leave his post and travel home to Yorkshire that evening, he found his family gathered around Emma's hospital bed, where she was conscious and asking questions about all the media attention surrounding her brother. The reunion was emotional for everyone involved, but James later said that Obama's words had given him the strength to fulfill his duties while still being present emotionally for his family during their crisis. The photograph of Obama and James became one of the most shared images of Obama's entire presidency. It was reprinted in newspapers, featured on magazine covers, and used in countless social media posts about leadership, compassion, and the importance of recognizing the humanity in everyone we encounter. The image captured something that many people felt was missing from modern politics and public life: a genuine moment of human connection that transcended all the usual barriers of rank, nationality, and circumstance. Academic institutions began using the photograph and the story behind it as teaching tools in courses about leadership, emotional intelligence, and public service. Business schools incorporated it into their curricula as an example of how true leaders recognize when human needs should take priority over procedural requirements. Military academies used it to illustrate the importance of supporting fellow service members during times of personal difficulty. The impact extended beyond educational settings as well. Mental health organizations pointed to Obama's gesture as an example of how acknowledging someone's struggle could provide crucial emotional support. Workplace consultants used the story to encourage managers to be more aware of their employees' personal challenges and to create environments where people felt comfortable seeking help when they needed it. International relations experts noted that the incident had actually strengthened the relationship between the United States and Britain, demonstrating shared values about the importance of military service and mutual support. The fact that an American president had taken time to comfort a British soldier became a symbol of the deep bonds between the two nations and their commitment to supporting each other's service members. Religious leaders from various faiths also embraced the story as an example of compassion in action, using it in sermons and teachings about the importance of seeing and responding to human suffering wherever it is encountered. The simple gesture of placing a hand on someone's shoulder and offering words of comfort became a model for how people of all backgrounds could support one another during difficult times. As the days passed after the incident, letters and messages began pouring into both the White House and Buckingham Palace from people around the world who had been touched by the story. Veterans wrote about their own experiences of receiving unexpected support during difficult moments. Parents shared stories of how they had used Obama's example to teach their children about empathy and kindness. Young people wrote about how the incident had inspired them to consider careers in public service or military service. The lasting power of this single moment of human connection demonstrated how individual acts of compassion could ripple outward to influence countless other people, creating a chain reaction of kindness and understanding that continued long after the original gesture had ended. What had begun as a spontaneous response to one young man's distress had become a symbol of what leadership could look like when it was guided by genuine care for human dignity and well-being. Years passed after that transformative day at Buckingham Palace, but the memory of President Obama's compassionate gesture continued to resonate across the world in ways that no one could have predicted. The simple act of recognizing a young soldier's pain and offering comfort had created a legacy that extended far beyond the walls of the palace and the boundaries of any single nation. James Mitchell's life took a remarkable turn following his encounter with Obama. After completing his service with the Queen's Guard, he made a decision that surprised many who knew him. Instead of pursuing a traditional military career or returning to his hometown in Yorkshire, James chose to dedicate his life to helping others who were struggling with personal crises while trying to fulfill their professional responsibilities. He enrolled in a university program to study counseling and psychology, focusing specifically on how to support people who worked in high-stress environments. James often spoke about how Obama's words during that difficult day had shown him the power of simply acknowledging someone's struggle and letting them know they were not alone. This experience became the foundation for his new mission in life. After graduating with honors, James established a non-profit organization called the Bridge Foundation, which provided mental health support and counseling services to military personnel, first responders, and others whose jobs required them to maintain professional composure even when facing personal challenges. The organization's name came from James's belief that sometimes people just needed someone to help bridge the gap between their public duties and their private pain. The foundation grew rapidly as word spread about its unique approach to supporting people in demanding careers. James's personal story of receiving unexpected compassion from President Obama became a powerful tool for encouraging others to seek help when they needed it. He would often tell audiences that if the President of the United States could take time to notice one person's struggle, then no one should feel ashamed about asking for support. Emma Mitchell made a complete recovery from her car accident and went on to become a successful nurse, just as she had always dreamed. However, her experience of nearly losing her life and seeing how it affected her brother led her to specialize in trauma care and emergency medicine. She frequently worked with patients who had been in accidents similar to her own, and she would often think about how her brother's strength during those difficult hours had been supported by an unexpected moment of presidential kindness. The photograph of Obama comforting James became one of the most enduring images of the Obama presidency. It was displayed in museums, included in history textbooks, and used in countless presentations about leadership and empathy. Art galleries around the world featured the image in exhibitions about moments that captured the human spirit, and it was often cited as an example of how great leaders could find time for individual compassion even in the midst of important state business. Obama himself reflected on the incident in his post-presidency memoirs, writing extensively about how some of the most meaningful moments of leadership happened not in boardrooms or on international stages, but in quiet personal interactions where someone chose to see and acknowledge another person's humanity. He described the encounter with James as a reminder that behind every uniform, every job title, and every public role was a real person with real struggles who deserved recognition and support. The former president established a scholarship program in partnership with James's foundation, providing funding for young people who wanted to pursue careers in public service, military service, or mental health support. The Obama Mitchell Scholarship became highly sought after, not just for its financial benefits but for the values it represented, about combining professional excellence with personal compassion. Educational institutions around the world continued to use the story as a teaching tool, but its applications expanded over time. Medical schools used it to teach future doctors about the importance of bedside manner and emotional intelligence. Business schools incorporated it into courses about authentic leadership and workplace empathy. Military academies used it to discuss how officers could better support their personnel during times of personal crisis. The story also became a frequent subject of research in psychology and sociology programs, with scholars studying how single acts of recognition and support could have lasting positive effects on individuals and communities. Multiple academic papers were published examining the incident as a case study in effective leadership, emotional intelligence, and the psychology of human connection. International diplomatic training programs began including the Obama-James encounter as an example of how cultural sensitivity and human awareness could strengthen relationships between nations. The fact that an American president had taken time to comfort a British soldier was seen as a perfect illustration of how shared values about human dignity could transcend national boundaries and create lasting bonds between allies. Religious and spiritual communities embraced the story as well, using it in sermons and teachings about compassion, service, and the importance of seeing the divine spark in every person we encounter. The Interfaith Council for Global Understanding issued a statement calling the incident a beautiful example of how leaders from all traditions can embody the universal values of kindness and recognition of human worth. Social media platforms continued to feature the story regularly, particularly during times when people felt that public discourse had become too harsh or impersonal. The hashtag Obama Royal Guard would trend periodically as people shared the story and reflected on its continued relevance. Many users would post their own stories of times when unexpected kindness from strangers had made a difference in their lives. The impact extended to popular culture as well. Several songs were written about the incident, including a folk ballad by a British singer-songwriter that became a surprise hit on both sides of the Atlantic. A children's book was published telling the story in simple terms that helped young readers understand the importance of noticing when others are sad and finding ways to help them feel better. Documentary filmmakers created several features about the incident and its aftermath, interviewing James, his family, palace staff who witnessed the moment, and experts who analyzed its significance. These films were shown in schools, community centers, and film festivals around the world, continuing to spread the message about the power of compassionate leadership. Mental health organizations reported that the story had helped reduce stigma around seeking emotional support, particularly among people in careers that traditionally valued stoicism and emotional control. Veterans groups noted an increase in members feeling comfortable discussing personal struggles and asking for help when they needed it. The annual remembrance of the incident became an unofficial international day of recognition for service members and first responders. On July 19th each year, social media filled with messages of gratitude for people who served their communities, while often carrying personal burdens that the public never saw. As Obama entered his post-presidency years, he would often be asked about the most meaningful moments of his time in office. While he accomplished many significant policy achievements and handled numerous international crises, he consistently mentioned the encounter with James Mitchell as one of the experiences that best represented his philosophy of leadership. The lasting legacy of those 30 seconds at Buckingham Palace proved that sometimes the most important things a leader can do are also the simplest. By choosing to see one person's pain and respond with genuine compassion, Obama had created a moment that continued to inspire people around the world to look for opportunities to support others who were struggling. The story became a reminder that true leadership was not just about making grand speeches or implementing major policies, but about recognizing the humanity in every person and finding ways to offer support, encouragement, and hope to those who needed it most. In a world that often seemed divided by politics, nationality, and other differences, the image of an American president comforting a British soldier served as a powerful symbol of what united all people in their shared need for compassion, understanding, and human connection.